opening of the show, is something a little bit different, and that is our continued information flow about gambling. And on the line, joining us as he does regularly from Alliance for Gambling Reform, is none other than their boss, Martin Thomas. Martin, good morning and welcome back to The Pulse.
Thanks, Rob. What an introduction. I appreciate it.
No, it's important, the work that you do, and I think it'd be interesting to start off and put some context into your organisation and the intent of your organisation, because an important part of the Australian culture is the racing industry. An important part of this time of year is the Spring Carnival, and we at Geelong are very excited about the Geelong Cup. It's a great festival, if you like, for our town. It brings people to the town, it brings finances into the town, and it allows an orderly manner of horse racing and gambling, which is part of the Australian folklore. But your industry is not so much about stopping this, it's about reforms to control the damage that gambling causes. And while we promote the good stuff around gambling, there is a lot behind the scene that is not only not good, it's just downright horrible. And it's really affecting our community badly, and this is where you kick in, and I think that should be clarified to start with.
Yeah, look, absolutely. We are not seeking to ban gambling. We think people have every right to gamble. We just don't think people should lose their house. Families shouldn't have to break up, and in some cases people jailed because of some sectors within the gambling industry where they prey on those who are vulnerable or those that are simply losing too much.
Now, interesting media release from your organisation this morning. The gambling industry would have to be the only industry that is allowed to keep the proceeds of crime. Now, that's quite a confronting statement, but what is your organisation trying to put in behind that, just to express the importance of that message?
Well, it follows an expose that Four Corners did last Monday, and it really we've talked a lot about the need for a gambling advertising ban, because there's about 1 million ads that are on our screens every year, and we think it's far too much and getting through to our kids. But the Four Corners program focused on a couple of areas which were really disturbing, and that was a number of people who had invested their savings through a financial planner. The financial planner gambled those proceeds away, ended up being jailed, all pretty clear cut, but then the industry and the bookmaker that he lost the money to didn't refund the money to those people. So under most industries, there's proceeds of crime coverage where there's a clear line and it can be proved that this money was raised in a criminal manner, it's taken back. And this simply does not happen in the gambling industry. And the peak body spokesperson went on the program and basically said, no, this is perfectly right. We're more than happy to keep those proceeds, and we don't think anything should happen. So that's pretty appalling, and I think it also just underscores the level of influence the gambling industry has over our political leaders, and the fact that in many cases they seem to get a golden ticket.
If you want to get involved in today's conversations, you can do that by joining us on the text line 0488 877 947. That's 0488 877 947 if you'd like to make a comment about our discussion with Martin or anything else during the morning. Martin, government is the key player in this, and I suppose as a taxpayer and a concerned citizen, and as I've said to you before, I've seen the effects of gambling. You continue, I guess, to lobby. You're one of the many groups in the country that does lobby, but the wave of organisations and individuals lobbying the 180-degree opposite philosophically to yourself, it's clearly weighing you down. How do you keep lining up every day when you seem to be fighting very much a David and Goliath battle?
Yeah, and look, my colleague that your listeners will be well aware of, Tim Costello, has been doing it for something like 30 years. What's really interesting now, though, is he says, like never before, the wind is actually at our back. The polls show 76, even to 85% of Australians want gambling reform. So it may have been in years past we'd be feeling like we were fighting a lone battle. Now it's very different. Now we have the vast majority of the public on side. What is strange is our political leaders continue to be deaf to it. But like most things, political leaders are absolutely steadfast in their policy positions until they're not.
Yeah.
And really, the more pressure that comes on them, the more chance is they'll do a 180-degree turnaround. At the moment, it is virtual, and it's always been the case, that those that profit from gambling inordinately, so the gambling industry itself, commercial TV, and we've talked a lot about the AFL and the NRL, support the status quo because they profit from it, because people lose their house, people lose their livelihood, and despite what the gambling industry says, there isn't any restrictions. We've had stories of people losing $30,000, $60,000, $100,000 at 3 a.m. in the morning, betting on races or basketball games across the world. And the betting companies know the patterns and can see exactly what's happening and never intervene to stop people. So I think it's becoming increasingly untenable for governments, both state and federal, to do nothing because more and more people really are concerned about the impact. And I think they're also really concerned about the impact on our kids because we're seeing our kids watch sport particularly, and when they go to an AFL website or an NRL website, the first thing they see is the odds rather than the score.
That's a very good segue. I was going to ask you, I find it abhorrent on two fronts, and there's two pretty obvious fronts the gambling industry are really bad at. One, I think, is the advertising, which is clearly aimed at new gamblers, and a lot of those are teenagers or even younger that do have access to apps and the like, and for some strange reason accounts, and they're able to bet maybe in the darkness of their bedroom all through the night, whatever the case may be. But the gambling advertisements are clearly targeted in this space, and still, with that evidence presented to government and authorities, there's still a reluctance to do anything. I think that in itself is quite abhorrent. But the other part that's worse, and you touched on again, the criminality, is that when the gambling industry targets known problem gamblers and let them run until they can run no further, I can't find which of those two is worse. Is your organisation focusing on one of those two elements of the industry's bad behaviour, or both, and how do you keep up?
Yeah, exactly. So we focused on all of those areas and other areas as well. We're not alone. We have a lot of supporters, and even within the parliaments, we have MPs that support us. One of the important issues on that second piece is the lack of decent regulation that's happening in Australia. And again, that Four Corners program focused on the Northern Territory Racing Commission, which all the big bookmakers that you see on TV are essentially registered in the Northern Territory. It's a low-tax regime, and that was their doorway into Australia. And the Racing Commission there is essentially a voluntary board. Historically, many of the members on it have had racing interests and owned racehorses and different things. And the Four Corners program looked at similar racing commissions in other countries and found that in some cases they have 150 staff. In Australia, this de facto national regulator essentially has a part-time board, and that's it. So there is no way we're getting adequate protection in Australia, and hence we've been calling for a national regulator for gambling.
We've got a text come in from Meg, and it's a pretty forceful one, and I imagine the racing industry is under pressure from two fronts, both the gambling and the cruelty to animals sector. But Meg sent in a text, a bit ironic for the Pulse to pump up the Geelong Cup and the Spring Carnival in 1 minute and platform the gambling industry the next. We're not platforming the gambling industry by talking about the Geelong Cup. The Geelong Cup, as I said before the show, is a Geelong festival. It's a national festival, and there's definitely room for both of them to operate, I feel. And again, it's a chance for you, Martin, just to explain where your organisation sits beside what is a vibrant part of Australian culture, and that is horse racing.
Yeah, look, I think we are really concerned with excesses and exploitation of an industry that is ruthless and largely unregulated. So I think certainly there is space in Australia for a responsible gambling industry, and particularly around horse racing and other things. We often don't focus on the horse races. We're largely looking at online betting and their operations, particularly in other sports as well. I think what's really important, I guess, if you think of Australian culture and people talk about the innate kind of nature of betting in Australia, the fact we'll bet on two flies crawling up a wall. You travel overseas and a lot of countries are exactly the same. In China and Ireland, they talk about how embedded gambling is in their culture. The one reason really I think, and we believe, that Australians are the biggest losers in the world per capita in terms of gambling losses is the lack of regulation. And that's the issue that we're most concerned about. The fact that you can have 1 million ads on TV every year, the fact that betting agencies can breach what is a pretty weak code anyway and go away with a slap on the wrist. The fact that the one key regulator on most of these big international bookmakers, which are all foreign-owned, pretty much is both compromised and grossly under-resourced. So they're the things we're focusing on. I think there's certainly room for gambling in a society as long as there's guardrails, and the industry itself can't be allowed to self-regulate, because really what it's shown is they are in it for profit, and they'll take the money from anyone they possibly can, especially those that are losing more than they can afford. So that's when it comes to governments to help protect and set limits. And to some extent it's no different to tobacco. That, we have restrictions on the sale of tobacco, we have restrictions on advertising, we try to protect kids from those tobacco adverts. With a similar approach to gambling is really what we've been talking about for a long time.
Martin, one of the big disappointments for me was a progressive-sounding Labor Party that was in opposition 2 elections ago talked a lot about these social reforms. Gambling was one of them, and in fact they organised one of their own members, or Peter Murphy, their sadly late member, organised a really thorough investigation. This came back with some pretty strong recommendations, which I'm sure your organisation would have been pretty happy about. But unfortunately, the party since then has dismissed pretty much everything that she put forward in that investigation. Is that still part of the basis of your negotiations with the government to say, well, here you are, you've already done the work, here's the data, why aren't you changing?
Absolutely. I mean, that Murphy review, chaired by Peter Murphy, and also endorsed by multi-parties which had committee members, both the major parties, independents and the minor parties, is pretty much the gold standard, the blueprint for how to reduce gambling harm in Australia. And it looked at things like a national regulator and banning gambling ads, the banning of inducements, which are really quite evil, where as soon as you stop gambling and try to give it up, you'll get a text or a phone call from a betting agency offering you, up to $500 free bets, etc., to haul you back in. So that is certainly a blueprint. Yeah, look, we have, of course, are really disappointed that after 2 years of receiving that report, the government hasn't even officially responded. There's been a lot of commentary from people that know much more about government than me, but the talk seems to be that this government wants to be sensible and in the middle ground and not take on too many issues. We just believe the overwhelming public anger at what's happening around gambling means that gambling reform must be added to their agenda. I can understand they don't want to take on and boil the ocean, every issue under the sun, but this one is one where there is just such a strong and compelling case. So we are continuing to try to talk constructively with the government and the Prime Minister to really hone the case that they need to take this on.
One of the issues that you're fighting against as well is not only the gambling industry, and I imagine their support for political parties, which would make them reluctant to change, but I imagine the media industry around that advertising dollar that's coming their way would be fighting just as hard against what you're doing, and that means you're fighting this battle on two fronts.
Yeah, look, that's certainly the case. Although, just like we've seen politicians from all sides reach out to us, not always willing to publicly talk about their support for what we're doing, but certainly providing encouragement for us. We do see a lot of courageous journalists across the board, from the ABC, but also from the commercial stations, and definitely community stations as well, who just say, well, look, we'll report the facts and we'll put the case and excuse the French, but bugger them, it's up to them if they report it, but we'll continue to put it. So we're really heartened by that, and we're sometimes surprised by how much coverage we do get, given the conflict that some of the bigger commercial stations have.
How can people listening that are moved by this, you said there's a wave of support, 75% plus, wanting change, and I would agree with that from the conversations I've had, even with people who gamble regularly. There's no doubt that is community sentiment, but what more can they do other than listen and say, yeah, I agree with you, Martin?
Yeah. Well, look, we would love them just to follow us. If you go to our website, which is agr.org.au, just sign up. We do a regular newsletter. You've referred to it today. And we will be providing people different opportunities to be able to respond, whether it's a petition, and not just to the government. We've done petitions to the AFL and the NRL, seeking for them to make a commitment about a gambling ad-free grand final next year. At different stages, we've worked with people and attended the AGMs of Channel 9 to raise questions publicly. We're about to look at a report into superannuation companies and how they treat gambling in terms of their investments. So there's lots of different opportunities for people to firstly become aware of the tentacles of gambling, to support us as an organisation and other organisations that are working in this area, but also to sign the old-fashioned way of democracy, which can appear slow and frustrating, but is to sign a petition, to write to an MP, to get active on key issues at key moments where, and that's what really brings about change.
Martin, one thing I'd like you to counter, and you mentioned the AFL, NRL, sporting organisations that clearly benefit from gambling. Now, they make all the right noise in saying that they care and they want to protect the community, but their defence is that they feel that they have to keep the gambling industry in-house to help monitor the damage against international powers. Does that argument actually hold water in any way, shape or form when you've said earlier that there's really no regulations around the gambling industry?
Yeah, no, it absolutely doesn't. The line is that if we don't allow gambling to have carte blanche in Australia, whether it's advertising or whether it's through the sponsorship of sport, then people will go to illegal overseas sites. And there's simply no evidence for that. In fact, the evidence is the opposite. A number of countries across Europe have really cracked down on gambling advertising, and there has been no corresponding surge in or even increase in moves to illegal gambling, online gambling sites. And at the same time, we are some of the most, vocal advocates of strengthening moves against illegal gambling as well. So the government needs to do more to crack down on that, and that's a little bit like a whack-a-mole, that as soon as you close down one site, another site opens. But, to have an argument that says we need to keep a toxic product so we can keep it in check, or we can keep young people playing sport, just really goes back to that same tobacco argument that, sure, it's addictive, sure, it's killing people, but we need it for the money. No one's really, and we've overcome that argument now as being completely ridiculous, and no one's arguing that tobacco advertising needs to be brought back in to subsidise youth sport. We really shouldn't be having gambling subsidising youth sport. With the tobacco ban, there was things put in place where Vic Health and entities were set up to fill the initial void left by tobacco advertising, and governments should do the same to help transition a hasty exit from gambling companies out of our sports.
So if you're moved by the conversation this morning and you want to do something or look into it more, gather more information, because I say in the show a lot, please get as much information as you can. Act on that once you've got it all. Look at things on the balance of probability if there's counter-arguments. But clearly if you go to agr.org.au, the Australian Alliance for Gambling Reform I shouldn't say Australian, that confuses it. Alliance for Gambling Reform will provide information for you to get a clear understanding of this argument and what you as an individual can do about it. And Martin, we thank you so much for your time, and I really do congratulate and wish you well in the future. You've got a passion to do it. I would say you mentioned Tim Costello, but I reckon you're every bit as passionate as him, and you've become quite the advocate, and we love the work that you do, and please keep up the energy to keep doing it.
Thanks so much, Rob. Appreciate it.
Martin Thomas, Alliance for Gambling Reform, that is a really serious social cancer, and there's probably not too many people now that haven't seen the effects either through friend, neighbour, family member, someone at a sporting club who's had trouble controlling gambling urges and the ripple effect damage that it has. Now, again, gambling is fine if you want to do it. I have no problem at all. I've got a lot of friends who gamble regularly. But when you have an organisation, an advertising campaign that's clearly targeting youngsters that have never gambled before to bring them into the net, but also knowingly target known problem gamblers, and there's been lots and lots of cases of organisations sending out invitations if someone hasn't gambled for a while, inviting them back, offering them bonuses to come back to bet, knowing full well that the illness that they have, and it is an illness, it's a disease like a lot of other social diseases, gambling, knowing that illness will bring them back into the net and force them to lose money they cannot afford to lose. And that then has a ripple effect on family, friends, and those around people. This is a horrible, horrible curse, and it is the single most troubling thing that I have at the moment about government in this country. On both sides of the two major parties are both now reliant on media and gambling support, that they refuse to do anything about this. And if there's anyone listening who's involved in either of the two major parties and would like to come on the radio and talk about why they allow gambling to happen, I would love to have the conversation, but it's very, very difficult to get them to talk about it. But we'd love to have you come on.